So I finally watched Cyberpunk Edgerunners, and I got things to say. If there was one anime that I've been asked to watch more than any other in the last year, it's been Edgerunners. I was told it was the most Bonsai Pop anime ever, which is not the worst selling point. People have a cursory grasp on my tastes at this point, I think, but is Cyberpunk 2077 Edgerunners the most Bonsai Pop anime of all time? Let's find out. So first off, I was told that I didn't need to play the game in order to enjoy the anime. However, I didn't totally buy that, so I played the game that let the world down. Cyberpunk easily had the most hype and biggest deflation since the launch of No Man's Sky. It was full of bugs, game crashing glitches, and barely ran on current gen consoles, if it did at all. However, since then, Cyberpunk's been patched heavily and is currently in a playable state and is especially gorgeous if your system can run it on Psycho and 4K, and since there's a 99% chance that's not possible for you, you'll either have to dumb it down to 1080p or just turn off ray tracing like I did. There's still glitches and crashing, but honestly, I had a lot of fun with the game. It's a solid mix of Fallout and GTA, but it doesn't really do either as good as its inspirations. However, what it lacks in a forever addicting gameplay loop, it does make up with visuals and world building. And honestly, I'm glad I chose to play it first. I think it was the right decision. The world of Cyberpunk 2077 is incredibly complex and very confusing, and the anime didn't do anything to help that. Edgerunners, Netrunners, Cyber Psychos, Arasaka, Militech, Chrome, Night City, even what 2077 is or means in the timeline of this world and its politics are super important, and it really helps to have some context. With that said, to really grasp the game in its entirety, it's probably going to take two playthroughs, as the first like 20 hours or so, you're going to be bumbling around wondering what the hell is going on and what anyone is actually talking about. I think all said and done, I put about 80 hours into it, completed every mission and its multiple endings, and I did have a really good time. I liked the game. So how did the anime stack up as far as the game goes for source material? Actually extremely well. Probably better than any game adaptation I've seen, including Castlevania, and that's saying a lot. Choosing to work with another character and another gang to make a pseudo prequel to the game's story was a great choice, and that way nobody has to deal with sacrifices to the source material, which always comes with a full adaptation. All that said, if you were to ask me, I would say play the game first if you can. It really helps you appreciate the lengths the anime went to fully incorporate the world of Cyberpunk down to a T. Now, Cyberpunk Edgerunners itself hit major popularity outside of the core Cyberpunk fanbase when it hit Netflix in September of 2022. Before that, it was just a web anime. It runs a short 10 episodes, but considering what it is and how it started, it packs an A-level punch. How? There's a few reasons. First would be money. While there's no exact data I could find, the producer of Trigger Studio said a reasonable amount for one episode would be about $460,000. Multiply that by 10, and you have 4.6 million bucks. That's a solid amount for a short-run web anime, but if you caught a certain studio in that last sentence, you'll understand the second reason why the quality is so good. Studio Trigger. Now, not to trigger you, but Trigger and I have a spotty past, especially when it comes to Hiroyuki Imaishi. I love Dead Leaves, I love Kill la Kill, but basically everything else he's directed I vehemently do not like. He's not my favorite director. The reason I enjoy Dead Leaves so much is because it's incredibly bombastic and stupid, but it doesn't try to be anything but that. It also doesn't take up much of your time. Imaishi definitely does stupid and bombastic extremely well. Kill la Kill, though, it was his only work that I found worth thinking about because it actually has something to say that isn't so on the nose you need rhinoplasty afterwards. Sometimes he hits it out of the park, sometimes he makes promare. I don't know, cry about it. All that said, Trigger's animation is nothing to sneeze at. The studio certainly has its own vibe, and for the most part, it's pretty excellent. There's no denying that. It's gotten pretty samey over the years, but for this project, for Cyberpunk, I don't know, something was different, and different in a good way. My guess is that it was the supervision of CD Projekt Red, the studio behind Cyberpunk and the Witcher series. And I know a lot has come out about that studio and its kind of shitty practices, but with someone there to rein in Imaishi, we ended up with a really good story without, blowing up the moon in a giant mech or some shit. In fact, if I had to compare Cyberpunk Edgerunners to any of Imaishi's work, it would be Dead Leaves. and that's a good thing. Night City is a rainbow barf hellscape of vice and debauchery, and Damaishi, with Trigger under his thumb, can do that better than nobody else. And given that it actually fits like a puzzle piece into the setting of the game, results in an absolutely perfect mesh. The guys that David walks past in the beginning, they're in a brain dance with jerk machines stuck to their crotch, is totally normal in Night City. It's also something that you can literally pull out of Dead Leaves. The neon bikers screaming at you in Japanese, daily occurrence in Night City. Nothing about the anime visually or stylistically is out of place in any way. This is a futuristic dystopia, up, down, and sideways, and Trigger absolutely nailed it. The audio was also fantastic. It uses a ton of music from the in-game radio, which of course pales in comparison to both Fallout and GTA, but it was a nice addition for those who played the game, and the songs fit the anime perfectly, especially the Transplants ditty that played throughout the first episode. The OP uses a cut-up version of This Fire by Franz Ferdinand, which I was surprised about, but I enjoyed it so much I actually never hit the skip intro button, so that's saying something. I also watched it in English, which is something I almost never do, but I played the game in English, so I wanted to see how it stacked up, and once again, it was 1-to-1. The people of Night City have a really weird way of talking. It's subtle. It's much less subtle than referring to each other as Choom, which is short for Choomba, which I think can be used for both buddy and buddy in the derogatory way, like an angry Canadian or a dick from Eastern Mass would say it. But the lingo of Night City, and more importantly, the strange, stilted way they talk, is recreated in the voiceover perfectly. I really can't put my thumb on what it is that makes it so different from typical American English, other than some strange British influences switching the subject and the object in sentences occasionally, but regardless, it was done super well, and between that and the high-flying acid trip action only Trigger can pull off, the production is about as polished as it could possibly be. But is the anime itself actually good? You know, as an anime, standing alone from the game on its own 2 feet, and on top of that, is it really the most Bonsai Pop anime of all time? Well, I think we should really get into that. So my guess as to why Cyberpunk 2077 Edgerunners was recommended to me so heavily is for the hyperviolence, over-the-top action, and rampant nudity, which, yeah, I mean, that checks off a lot of my boxes. However, the most important thing to me in any media, music, movies, video games, anime, is the story, the lyrics, the meaning behind the art. If there's no real story, sure, you can give me something violent, dirty, and stupid, and I'll probably love it. I don't need to invest in or think about that kind of stuff. I can just enjoy the ride. Dead Leaves is pretty much that, though I think it would be doing it a disservice to say that there's no story at all. But if that's the case, Edgerunners would be the opposite. I think it's important to preface this segment by admitting that the story in the game wasn't my favorite to begin with. Right, you can have a depressing story and come out of it with, I don't know, a sense of satisfaction, I guess, but Cyberpunk is just depressing. We already live in a world full of doubt, with politicians in the pockets of billionaires and corporations. The middle class is basically gone, and if you aren't in the 1%, you're really just ironically surviving in the richest country in the world, assuming you're American. We already deal with an intense amount of violence in this country as it is. Nowhere is particularly safe, not even schools, and we are blasted by advertisements at every single turn. Sometimes you won't even know what you're looking at as an ad unless you do some critical thinking, which you should do when you're reading the quote-unquote news. Cyberpunk turns this up to 200%, where the world is a post-nuclear annihilated hellscape, human life means nothing, and the entire planet is run by giant corporations. Night City, a mix of New York and LA, is situated in the middle of the desert wasteland that is 2077 California. The populace is split between the haves and the have-nots to such a degree that if you have no money, you're basically a rat. Nobody's going to bat an eye if somebody crushes you under their boot. You exist to consume and feed the rich. And while there's law, the law is pretty lawless. Using cybernetic implants, anyone can scan an individual to see if they have a bounty, and if they do, you're free to execute them on the spot. Drug use, prostitution, everything is fair game and enhanced significantly by the intense technology which has become commonplace even amongst the poor. It's kind of like how we all have smartphones and the internet as basic necessities at this point. Night City is in a sad, hopeless world with virtually no way out, and is also the epicenter of it. Now in the anime, we learn this immediately when David Martinez and his mother are run off the road by some gangbangers trying to catch a score. These poor folks from Santo Domingo, which is a slum area of the city, are literally left to die by trauma team because they don't have good enough insurance. That would be like an ambulance ignoring you while you bled out on the street because you didn't have money. To compound on this, due to their shitty health health plan, David's mother gets a crap surgery from a sketchy back alley doctor and dies the next day. This leaves David all alone in the city to fend for himself, and I don't think I need to point out the similarities between this and the world we're already living in. And that's really the kicker. While Cyberpunk is bombastic, action-packed, violent as hell, and more colorful than a melted jumbo box of crayons, it's inherently miserable. It's not an escape. Instead, it's a finger pointing out how fucked we all are. And case in point would be David Martinez himself, who gets expelled from the academy his mom worked herself to the bone to get him in after finding a piece of cyberware which was hidden in their apartment and has it implanted by a sketchy Ripper doc, which he then uses to kick the ass of his school bully, who's a rich kid who hates David because he doesn't fit in. It's a little cliche, but whatever. Having nothing else available to him, David turns to a Robin Hood-esque crime after meeting a netrunner named Lucy. And before getting too far into this, an edgerunner is a mercenary who runs the line between being an outlaw and legitimacy. A netrunner is an edgerunner who uses cyber hacks as their main form of offense, utilizing programs called daemons to hack into other people's tech implants to immobilize them or blow their heads up or set them on fire. There's a variety of uses. They can also fully jack into the net, kind of Matrix style. So David and Lucy kind of hit it off. They work together for a while. She even invites him back to her apartment for a little date to the moon via a brain dance, which is basically a full dive VR experience. She lets him in a bit, which is uncharacteristic for her. This is until David finds out she was just keeping him busy while the leader of her mercenary gang could get there in order to take David's cyberware. The military grade Sandevastin neuralware, which allows the user basically to speed up to the speed of light in short bursts, was supposed to be delivered to this guy Maine by David's mother, who is secretly working for Mercs to pay for his education. However, after learning David's aptitude for the device, which should have knocked him out after one use, Maine decides to give him a shot as an edgerunner in his gang. And this is where the idea of cyber psychosis comes into play. Cyber psychos are super strong enemies within Cyberpunk 2077, the game. There's a series of them that you have to capture for a fixer, which is just a name for a contractor, but they aren't explained super well in the game, like what made them go crazy, I don't know. But thankfully the anime fleshes this out by explaining how too much cyberware, in shorthand they call it Chrome, can overload your nervous system and make you go nuts. Essentially, every person has a limit as to how much their body can handle, and if you push past it, you can easily lose your mind. This is a major plot point in the anime, both starting and ending with cyber psychosis and getting a solid punch of it in the middle. And I think story-wise, that was really well done to start with it, come back to it, and then end with it. There's like a lot of foreshadowing in that. It's really good. Regardless, David proves himself to be a valuable member of the gang and quickly begins to enjoy the lifestyle of a merc, becoming friends with the various characters. And things get a little weird though, right? So there's this scene that's supposed to be super impactful when David finally confronts Lucy about her betraying them. They talk it out and he promises to take her to the moon one day because it's her dream to go there. But then the scene literally dissolves into the "I promise you I will never die" meme.
There's no chance we can ever be together?
Only if you could promise me you'll never die. If you did that, I would make love to you right now.
I promise I will never die.
It takes itself way too seriously. There wasn't a ton of time, right, to build up this romance, but that isn't a big deal. In a 10-episode series, you kind of expect that. But to make me literally unable to stop laughing during what was supposed to be an emotional bonding experience between the two main characters was definitely a hit against the writing. But that's the thing about Cyberpunk, and a reoccurring theme within the anime and the game is that nobody makes it out alive. Mercs can become legends in Night City, and that's kind of the idea behind it. You get rich, you become cool, everybody wants to work with you, yada yada. But they do all end up dead eventually, and it's never from old age. The second you start down that path and commit yourself to it, your fate has already been sealed. And there's an emphasis on greed, which is woven throughout everything that goes on in Night City. Again, pointing out to the American lifestyle, but the series works to show how greed literally consumes people. For instance, the greed people have for power. While Militech and Arasaka are the ultimate examples of this idea of power and greed, we also see it on a smaller scale with Maine and then David. Chrome allows people to surpass human limits, but it comes at a cost. Some people get addicted to that power. If you were to replace it with, say, I don't know, a stimulant in the series, it would have the same effect. Maine is Chrome to the gills and eventually loses it because he doesn't know when to stop. He gets a bunch of people around him killed, characters that you'll like, and he just accepts it. But David, who goes to save him while Maine is in full-blown cyberpsychosis, literally witnesses the damage that it can do. He loses his friends, he loses Maine, but instead of learning from it, he returns to Lucy with the only thing left of the guy he looked up to, his cybernetic implants. And then we get a time skip and we find that Lucy has stepped away from the crew and that David has become super chromed out himself and taken over Maine's status as leader. He's also added Maine's arms to himself as well as a bunch of other attachments. He thinks he can do this and get away with it because of his aptitude for the Sandevistan, something again that should have knocked him out after one use, but he could use it quite a bit before getting tired. He thinks he's special, but he's really not. And I'm not going to go full dive into the end of this series, but it turns out that everyone from Maine's crew was dancing in the hands of Arasaka basically the whole time, Arasaka being the biggest corporation in the world. Lucy, in her absence, has been net running to find a way to save David from becoming an Arasaka lab rat, again because he was so well equipped to use the Sandevistan. Meanwhile, David continues to add more and more chrome to his arsenal, and there's a fantastic moment late in the show where David loses it for just a second and murders an innocent woman. And she had just asked her boss to go home early to surprise her son, who made it into the same school that David was expelled from. It's a real you either die a hero or live long enough to become the villain scenario without totally spelling that out. He became the guy that killed some kid's mother. You know, it was really dark and very, very well done. And yes, eventually David is overcome by his thirst for power, and just like Maine gets his friends killed in an attempt to make a big score. However, in his last moments, he is able to save Lucy from Arasaka before being blown to bits, but it's bittersweet at best. Lucy had worked so hard to save David in the first place and inevitably failed, not because she didn't try hard enough, but because David was in too deep. He didn't have a dream other than to fulfill the dreams of his mother and Maine, which honestly sucks and makes me kind of disappointed in him for not taking his promise to take Lucy to the moon seriously. That said, the money he made from securing his last job was enough for Lucy to get to the moon, so she ends up going alone. And the anime ends with her looking at the earth, remembering David before he became a psychotic metal beefcake. The shit is fucking bleak, dude. And I think that's where the disconnect is for me. I grew up deep-seated in the punk scene, and there's a big difference between being kind of like an academic punk and a lifer. Punk is definitely a philosophy more than a movement or a scene, right? Scenes grow and die, but philosophy transcends time. It infects future generations and can bring people hope where there is none. The idea of what punk is now is very different from what it was in the late 70s when it kind of surfaced. But unfortunately, where lifers end up is generally hopeless and eventually dead. And I've seen that more times than I'd like to think about. If it isn't violence or suicide, it's the drugs and the lifestyle. And there was a point where I just walked away. What you realize after a certain amount of time, waking up with horrible headaches and a day of puking your guts out ahead of you, is that the parties and the shows and the sex and the minor celebrity, it's all just candy coating on a rotten trash pile. And that's Cyberpunk 2077 Edgerunners. It's beautiful, it's exciting, it's sexy and violent, but absolutely hopeless and miserable. And that doesn't mean I didn't enjoy my time with it. I definitely did. I think it was a great watch, but I also don't think I'll ever be watching it again. Just like I'm done with the game, even though I really enjoyed it. I appreciate people pointing me in its direction, and I think that they had the right idea. They were on the right track. But is this the most Bonsai Pop anime of all time? Nah. Does it hit a lot of the themes we've discussed in our videos? Absolutely. I know that the world is messed up and that people are flawed, and I really do enjoy me some dark, disturbing anime. But even things like Berserk and Ninja Scroll and Claymore have that glimmer of hope, that fight for the future, the idea of never giving up and reaching for the ideals that you hold close. It's one of my favorite things about anime in general, is that there almost always is that optimism. And though we do point out the flaws in society and the things that we should be concerned with, we always have optimism here. We always try to give people a little bit of hope. In Cyberpunk, the bad guys have already won, and there is nothing anybody can do about it except get what they can before they die. And personally, especially right now, that world is a little too much to swallow for me. What I can say is that it stands as a great example of what can happen if we as a people give up, if we don't continue to fight. So I would say thank you for showing me this anime, and keep believing, reach for a better future.